has actually been a longstanding member of the 14ers.com community. Like I said, I've known him for about a decade or so now. He's quite passionate about 14er education. He's given these talks many, many times, both virtually and in person. If you frequent any of the events that they have at either Mountain Chalet in Colorado Springs, Bent Gate in Golden, and Neptune Mountaineering in Boulder. Nick is also a very experienced climber. He finished the 14ers in 2013 on Mount Democrat. Over 170 summits under his belt, including Mount Rainier. I had the pleasure of joining him for that. Mount Whitney and also Mount Muir in California. He also is a passionate skier, so he does a lot of backcountry skiing as well. And definitely one of the big things about him as well is he really focuses on safe climbing practices as well. So as for somebody that's been a partner with him on many, many peaks, I can definitely attest to that. But again, education is absolutely paramount. Absolutely paramount to us, and so we're actually really happy to have Nick with us here this evening, and glad he volunteered to do this for us for the second year in a row. So, without any further ado, Nick.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Welcome, everyone. We set up a poll question about where you're from and how many peaks you've done. So feel free to jump on that, and I'll get us started here. Okay, so introduction to hiking Colorado's 14ers, where to go, what to do, and how to stay safe doing it. So I'm going to give us kind of a quick overview of 14er terminology, and then we're going to talk about and go through the steps of how to plan your hike, what to bring on your hike, what to do if you get into trouble, how to act on the trail and follow leave no trace principles, and then we're going to talk quickly about the 14er community, and then we're going to end with a group discussion. And so as Ryan mentioned, save your questions until the end, or feel free to type them in the chat. And then if you like somebody else's question, we'll make sure and answer those first in the group discussion. All right, so I moved to Colorado in 2007 from Alaska. I was living at sea level. And that very first summer, some friends invited me to hike a 14er. I didn't really know what that was or why we had to get up so early. And so I don't know, somehow made it up to the summit. And I thought, wow, this is really amazing. So this is me on Mount Bierstadt. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I really liked it. And I said, man, I want to do that again. And so from that single event, came a number of years of just mountain adventures in Colorado. I had the privilege of climbing all the 14ers, of doing trail work with the Colorado 14er initiative, of going out of state and climbing some 14ers, doing some winter peaks, and just all these fun experiences came just from that one Saturday morning when I got up and hiked up the Bierstadt. And so when I give this talk, I think about this guy here, who's kind of a gaper and had no idea what he was doing. And I think if I could just go back in time and tell him everything I know now, what I would share with him. That's kind of what this talk is about. So let's start with the very basics. What is a 14er? Well, a 14er is a mountain that's higher than 14,000 feet. And Colorado has 58 14ers. Likewise, a 13er is a peak between 13,000 and 14,000. You can spell a 14er as 14ER or spell out 14er. Don't stick an N in there and try to say 14er and don't put an apostrophe. If you see somebody kind of using these terms, it's questionable. I'd be leery of what they're telling you. All right, so where are the 14ers located? Well, pretty much all over the mountains. This star is right here in Denver, where I'm coming to you from Golden today. And these are all the peaks spread out. As of right now, there are 52 14ers that are accessible and free to hike. There is one 14er on private land that you have to pay $150. That's Calabria Peak, which is just right near the New Mexico border. And currently there are 5 peaks that are closed because of ownership and land disputes, and they're here in the X's. And so the remaining 52 peaks are everywhere else on the map. If you're interested in getting away from crowds and having a little more nature experience, there are 764 13ers in Colorado. And as you can see, they surround all the 14ers. But people, the majority of people spend their time on 14ers, and these 13ers kind of sit there empty, quietly right next to them. And the 14ers are kind of broken down by their mountain ranges. The Front Range is where most people in Colorado live, has 6 peaks. The 10-mile Mosquito Range out by Breckenridge. The Swatch Range runs from about Leadville down to Salida. The Elks is down around Aspen. San Juan's has Lake City, Telluride, Silverton, and the Sangre de Cristos are down south. All right, so the trails on 14ers are broken into a class rating system. And class 1 is the easiest type of trail. This is usually a trail that was created by a group like the Colorado 14er Initiative. Here's some examples of class 1 trails, and you can see they're just pretty easy walking. Class 2 actually covers kind of a wider range. So there's kind of regular class 2 and there's difficult class 2. And regular class 2 can be kind of a similar trail, and difficult class 2 can be everything from boulders or larger rocks to very loose scree. So kind of pay attention when they say class 2, whether it falls into one of these 2 categories. And then class 3 is actually the first class of climbing. It's recommended that you wear a helmet on these peaks. And here's 2 kind of classic examples, 2 of my favorites. This is the crux of Wetterhorn Peak right below the summit. And then on the right, Wilson Peak there. So that's class 3 scrambling. And then the hardest peaks are class 4. There's only a handful of peaks that have class 4 routes. Probably the most known ones are Capitol Peak. This is the knife edge on the left, and the Hourglass on Little Bear on the right. And routes are rated by whatever the hardest section of the hike is. So you may have class 2, you know, for the majority of the hike, and then you might have a short 50 or 100-foot class 3 section. And then that'll be rated as a class 3 hike, even though the majority of the hike might be class 1 or class 2. So this is kind of a ranking from 14ers.com of the different classes of the routes. And I like to think of class 1 and beginning class 2 as beginners, and then the difficult class 2 and getting into some of the class 3s as being more intermediate climbs. And then the advanced or the hardest climbs are some of the hardest class 3 and the class 4 climbs. And so for this talk tonight, we're going to be focused on the beginner and the intermediate, and we're not really going to talk about the advanced peaks. And the exciting thing is, you know, if you really enjoy hiking, but you don't want to get into more technical climbing, or you want to stay on safer routes, you have 30 some routes over here on the left that are nice class 1 and class 2 trails before you have to get into harder hiking. Okay, so another thing to consider is the quality of the rock. Not all mountains are the same. And so here's kind of 2 examples. On the left here, this is the Crestone conglomerate on Crestone Needle. This is a very solid rock that's fun to scramble on and climb on, and it's pretty tough. And then on the right is South Maroon Peak. It's the Maroon Bells, and it's just a loose scree pile where every step you take, you know, something moves. And so sometimes, you know, if it's a class 2 or a class 3 hike, sometimes being class 3 on solid rock will actually feel a lot more comfortable than being on class 2 on really loose rock. So it's something to consider. All right, we're going to go through some terms here. So if you look at this picture here, we got a lot of trees, and then all of a sudden there's a line, and then there's no trees above that. Well, what's that about? That's known as tree line. And it's a function of elevation and latitude. And it's basically the point on the mountain where the conditions are too extreme for trees to grow above that. Tree line in Colorado ranges from 11,600 to 11,800. It's going to be depending where you are in the state. And tree line is kind of important because, you know, all the 14ers are a couple thousand feet above tree line. And when you're above tree line, you're exposed to the weather, you're exposed to lightning. And so you're a lot safer when you get back to tree line and back into the woods. And as a side note, this is Wilson Peak. Does anybody know what Wilson Peak is famous for? Everybody's muted, so I'll just tell you. It's actually the 14er on the Coors Light can. And if you don't drink Coors Light, I won't blame you. But next time you see someone with a Coors Light can, take a look. There's one of our 14ers on their beer. Okay, a couple other terms that we're going to go over. A saddle is kind of the low point between two peaks. We talked about ridge. We know what a tree line is. A gully is just kind of a low spot, usually has a creek through the bottom. And then if you're from Boulder, you might recognize this as art. But for the rest of us, it's known as a cairn. And these are little markers that people place along the trail. Sometimes the routes are hard to find, or sometimes if there's a lot of loose rock, people will build these cairns as like little guideposts to help you along. The one thing I will warn about is anybody can build a cairn, and we don't always know if the person who built it knew exactly where they were. So don't trust them 100%. But a lot of times when you're out looking, trying to find the trail, cairns are a good source and kind of help you along the route. And usually the bigger the cairn is, the more you can trust it. Here. Also, a lot of the summits have benchmarks. This picture is from Mount Bierstadt, and the US Geological Survey placed this benchmark in 1955, which is kind of cool. Not all the peaks have them, but a lot of them do. And so when you get to the benchmark, you know you're at the summit. But if you get to a summit and there's not a benchmark on that peak, don't freak out, because not all of them have survived through the years. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit now about how to plan your hike and what to look at. And 14ers.com was founded by this man, Bill Middlebrook. Bill was a computer programmer and started a company in the 90s at the height of the .com era. And he developed a system where in the past, companies would place orders by fax machine. And Bill used this new technology known as the internet to be able to place orders over the internet, which kind of made the fax machine obsolete. And some of you guys don't even know what a fax machine is, and you can thank Bill Middlebrook for that. So Bill sold his company, cashed out at the height of the .com. Boom, he moved to Breckenridge and he skied every day. And just for fun in his spare time, he just put together this website so he could keep up his programming skills. And in the beginning, it started as just kind of a photography site that he was interested in the 14ers. And then over time, it grew to route description and forums, and eventually became what it is today, including the 14ers.com app. So I'm going to step out of, I'm going to do a live demonstration here of what I look at to plan a hike. So this is 14ers.com. On the left here, you can look at, here's all 58 of the 14ers. I'm going to plan a hike for, we'll say Bierstadt, because that was my first 14er, and that's a good one that I recommend that people start with. So we can look at, you know, the different routes, the different maps. All the information that you need to plan your hike is right here in one place on one website. And so here's Mount Bierstadt. We're going to look at this route here. This is the standard route. So we'll just start on the west slopes. And so basically what we have on the left is the basics of the hike. You know, the elevation, what you start at, how long the hike is, what the total length is. And then down here, we have a short description and a number of photos that you can walk through. And so this is the magic blue line. If you follow that, you'll be in good shape. And along the route description, it'll just have, places, turnoffs, and everything to stay on the route. A little bit later, we're going to come back and I'll show you weather and how to make some decisions planning for weather. We'll come to that later. Another thing that's really helpful is a conditions report. And so what happens is people will go out and they'll hike, and especially like this time of year, one of the big questions, there we go. One of the big questions is there snow on the route? So looks like Jay, who was up there 6 days ago, says, unless there's a solid freeze, you will need snowshoes or skis. It's getting pretty soft. I had snowshoes, and that one guy had a split board. We were the only ones to summit, So that kind of gives you an indication. There's still a lot of snow up there. It hasn't been getting very cold overnight, etc. The other thing to look at is trip reports. And a trip report are, kind of details that have been written by a user of the site. So you can look at Mount Bierstadt. Let's see here. And and so trip reports are nice if you're going a certain time of year and you want to see like what the weather's like normally or how much snow there is usually, or maybe you have somebody that personally who maybe hikes at your speed or is kind of at your level, and you just want to see what it was like for them. So this one looks like a pretty exciting one. They did the traverse of the Sawtooth. So there's a lot of history here. You can go back and you can read through all the trip reports and learn a lot before you actually go out. Okay, I'm going to jump back slides. Okay. All right, so let's talk about all right, here we go. Sorry about that. All right, so where's a good place to start? If you're looking to hike your first 14er, these are the peaks that I recommend. Like I said, Bierstadt was my first, Grays and Torreys. All three of these peaks are very close to Denver, about an hour away. Quandary's out by Breckenridge. Those are all good peaks to start with. Sherman, Huron. Democrat is actually currently closed. I just kind of left it on here because I hope that it will be open again soon. But right now you can't summit Democrat. And so one of the things to think about is, let's do a comparison here between, let's look at Quandary and Sherman. So these two peaks here. So Quandary is a class 1, Sherman's a class 2, and a lot of people will think, well, class 1 is going to be easier than class 2. But other things to consider is to look at the elevation gain. So when you hike Quandary, you're going to gain about 1,300 feet more, and you're also going to go about 2.5 miles further. And so for most people hiking their first peak, Sherman is probably going to feel a little bit easier just because of that elevation gain. And probably the biggest thing, we look at the class ratings, but we also really look a lot at the elevation gain. And 3,000 feet is kind of a standard day. 5,000 feet is a pretty big day. And if you're used to like backpacking or other types of outdoor activities, you may look more at mileage, but elevation gain is kind of what we focus on a lot. And then if you've hiked a lot of class 1 and class 2 and you want to kind of break into the class 3 routes, these are some good first class 3 routes that I recommend. I really like the Sawtooth Traverse between Bierstadt and Evans. That's class 3. Long's Peak is a big day. It's a long day with a lot of elevation, but it has some good, class 3 routes. Wetterhorn down here is my favorite peak. That's a little bit further away. I showed a picture of that earlier, but that has some class 3 routes. So these are good places to start if you're interested. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what to bring. You know, we know where we want to go, and we have a route description, and what do we need to pack? So you've heard of the 10 essentials. They include navigation, sun protection, insulation, illumination, first aid, fire repair kit, nutrition, hydration, and emergency shelter. So that's a nice list, but what does that actually look like when we start packing? So the first thing you want to do is you want to dress in layers. And basically in the morning, it's going to be kind of chilly, and you're probably going to be wearing most or all your layers. And then as it warms up during the day, you're going to be taking layers off. And then as you get higher up, it might get windy or a little bit chilly, and you'll put more layers on. So you want to make sure and have a couple different layers, base layers. It's a good idea to wear long pants. You can wear shorts if you want, but you'll be battling the sun and you might scrape your legs up a little bit. You want to have a little bit of insulation, like a jacket or a fleece, and then you want some kind of a shell in case it rains or the wind really picks up. And so what I usually do is have like a base layer, and then I'll have like a long sleeve shirt, and then I'll have like a puffy jacket or a fleece, and then I'll have just a rain jacket to put over that. It's also a good idea to bring like a ski cap and gloves, and then of course bring your hiking boots or shoes. And especially if you're starting out, you don't have to go buy, you know, expensive hiking boots. Shoes, tennis shoes are fine. If you start, you know, hiking every weekend, or you get into more technical climbing, you're probably going to want to invest in some hiking shoes. But in the beginning, you don't have to go out and spend a lot of money. Make sure you bring sunglasses and a hat. The closer you are to the sun, the brighter it is, and the more harsher it is on your eyes. And then usually in my backpack, you want to bring a backpack. And I recommend 2 to 3 liters of water. You always kind of want to bring, starting out, you want to bring a little more water than you think you'll use. And as you start hiking more, you'll start to kind of realize how much you'll need. Plenty of food and snacks. And then navigation, either, you know, on your phone, either the 14ers.com app or some other navigation apps that we'll go over. It's also a good idea to bring a first aid kit, and definitely want to do sunscreen. You can burn very easily at elevation. And for your first aid kit, you know, if you don't want to go out and buy a first aid kit, just go to your medicine cabinet and just grab some of the basics, you know, ibuprofen, Tylenol, Benadryl, Imodium, you know, anything you can think of. Just throw a couple pills in a bag and have it with you. Band-Aid, duct tape. That'll get you through most situations. I always take a headlamp with me. Headlamps don't weigh hardly anything, and if you get lost at night, or you need a rescue, or you get caught after dark, it's a great way to get down. It's also a great way to signal for help if something goes wrong. And then I recommend getting an emergency bivy, which is basically kind of like a mix between a space blanket and a sleeping bag. And the idea is that, you know, if you get into an emergency situation and you're going to be sitting out there a while, you can just hop into your bivy and stay warm. They don't really weigh much, and they can just sit in the bottom of the pack, your pack, until you need them. So that's usually what's in my pack. And some of the things, you know, some of the keys to staying safe on your hike, you know, you want to start early in the morning to avoid lightning strikes. Usually thunderstorms come in the afternoon, especially in the early part of the summer. And so you want to be to the summit and be heading back down long before thunderstorms come rolling in. So for a lot of hikes, you know, a good time to start is probably around 6 a.m. or earlier. If it's a really big day, you know, you might start 3 or 4 a.m., etc. So I recommend every hour just stopping and taking like a 5-minute break. You kind of want to eat before you really start to feel hungry, and you want to drink before you get thirsty. Sometimes people are feeling good and they're just cruising, and then all of a sudden they just kind of bonk and they run out of energy. And so if you're eating and drinking along the way, you're going to be feeling better. And for time estimates, I would say starting out, maybe estimate about 700 feet an hour up to about 1,000 feet an hour. I hike today around 1,000 feet an hour is what I estimate. I'm not the fastest hiker, but if I'm doing a peak that's, we'll say 3,500 feet, I'll estimate that it'll take 3.5 hours to go up, and then, maybe spend half an hour on the summit, and then 2,000 feet, or 2 hours coming down for that. So I would start out, just kind of estimate whatever the total elevation gain is, divide that by 600 or 700 feet, and that would probably give you an estimate of what the time's going to take on your way up. And
Hey,
then,
Nick.
yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to hop in and say one thing is, I've known some people caught off guard by, they can do 1,000 feet in 30 minutes at, Denver elevation, and things are a lot different with your body, higher elevation. So, the time estimate could be thrown off if you're using your in-town hiking speed, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree with that. So thank you, Mary. And then lastly, select good partners and especially avoid bad partners. And finding good partners is what makes a good partner. It's usually somebody who is interested in the same peaks that you are, probably travels at a similar speed or is willing to go at your speed. Someone who has a similar risk tolerance that you do and is willing to turn around with you if you feel uncomfortable. And then hopefully someone that you enjoy being with and you get along with. And, good partners becomes more important as you get on the harder peaks. When you're in the class 3 and class 4, you can really rely on your partner. So you want to make sure and have people that you can trust hiking with. So I mentioned navigation. Bill has done a lot of work on the 14ers.com app, which you can download on your phone. And then if you're going to use the app as your navigation, make sure and download the photos ahead of time so they're actually stored on your phone. So if you lose cell phone reception, you can still look at it. I also like to run an app called Gaia over here on the right. It's a free download, and it's also a good way to track and navigate as well. And I'll actually run both these apps on my phone when I'm hiking. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Mary. Mary is a peak steward with the Colorado 14ers Initiative, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about Leave No Trace.
Yeah. So I'm kind of double digging because you guys know me as one of the admins for the 14ers.com Facebook page. But as Nick mentioned, yes, I am also a double agent. I volunteer with the Colorado 14ers Initiative as a peak steward, which basically we are the ethics and ecology educators, boots on the ground, talking to hikers throughout the summer at some of your favorite trailheads. And for those of you who aren't yet aware, Colorado 14ers Initiative, or CFI for short, is the nonprofit organization that's basically responsible for most of the 14er trail builds and trail maintenance. And they work in partnership with the Forest Service. But the education component for how to actually hike responsibly in the alpine environment is becoming so critical due to human impact. And that's why this topic is really important to incorporate. It's, safety is important, but how you're out there incorporating yourself into the environment is also important. So just as a frame of reference, going back to some 2021 numbers, the hiker use days, and this is just across only 5 months, those 5 summer months. Quandary saw over 35,000 hikers. Bierstadt saw over 30,000 hikers. Elbert, Grays, and Torrey saw over 20,000 hikers each. And again, that's over a 5-month span just in 2021. So think about it as, what would your lawn look like if that many people walked across it throughout one summer? It probably wouldn't look that great, right? Trails exist actually for the protection of the environment, not just for our comfort. So there's a lot to say about Leave No Trace, but I'm really going to highlight a few of the things that we are seeing a lot of, things that we, it's a community effort to keep these places pristine. So I'm just going to touch on some highlights, not necessarily on all 7 of the principles that are shown on the screen. So first of all, a little bit about the alpine. The environment above tree line is the harshest environment on the planet. It is studied heavily throughout the years just for being what it is. It's such a very harsh place. So it surprises people sometimes to learn that it's also very fragile. But the best way to think about that and understand that is that alpine plants, alpine animals, they are designed for those conditions. They are designed to withstand the wind, the temperature, all of the elements. They are not designed to withstand impacts that don't naturally occur. That's us. That's our footsteps. It can take just 5 steps to kill an alpine plant because they are not designed to withstand compression. But it can take hundreds of years for the soil to regenerate, for that plant to regenerate. So just something that's really compelling to me is that when you're out on some of these trails, you'll see areas closed for restoration, and those areas won't actually be fully recovered within our lifetimes. Once the damage is done, it takes a long, long time to come back. So the first key area I want to focus on is about staying on trail, which sounds really intuitive, but I've done a ton of observation, as have other stewards and even just other folks in the community out hiking. It's not as intuitive sometimes as you might think, and certainly not for newer hikers who might be looking at the vegetation going, man, that looks a lot nicer to hike on than a rocky trail. And that's how what's pictured in this first picture, that's how that happens. It's called trail braiding. That happens when folks decide, the green stuff looks a lot more comfortable, so I'm going to walk there. Or this time of year, they're walking around the mud when really they should be walking through the mud. So staying on trail is really important, and even for rest breaks. So I have this saying that I tell new hikers is, if it's brown, sit on down. If it's green, keep it pristine. And I just always hope that they remember that. The second thing is one of my favorite topics, and it's about poop. It's just waste is becoming, or has become, a really big issue as the peaks have become more popular. It's an issue at Everest. It's an issue in Colorado. So we're seeing it a lot more. And something to keep in mind, kind of going back to the science of the alpine, is that any substance that doesn't occur there naturally is not going to do well there naturally. So things don't, waste doesn't decompose like it would in town, or even things like orange peels, they don't decompose up in the alpine as they might in a normal, lower elevation environment. So, but also when you're introducing something that's not naturally occurring to that environment, it introduces bacteria that can make the insects, the animals sick if they get into it. Other impact, who likes to see waste while they're hiking? But unfortunately, we are seeing a lot more of this, fecal matter, tissue, tampons, seeing a lot more of that. And then just briefly, some of you are probably familiar with cat holing. It's basically, digging a hole to do your business. It's still an acceptable technique below tree line, but certainly not above tree line, because that would involve digging into the alpine environment. So what's the solution to the waste problem? My favorite thing in the whole world, my favorite piece of gear is a WAG bag or a Go Anywhere kit. REI and other retailers sell this, or other brands of this. They come with deodorizing crystals inside, and it's a way to be able to pack out your waste. And the first time or two you use them might be awkward, but this is really, something that you can do for the environment that you're in. They're also, really helpful in a pinch if your body reacts to altitude. So, and then dog waste is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. We've just seen this constantly. So the same concepts apply here. Pack it out. And I love seeing folks that have like packs on their dogs. So their dogs are carrying all their stuff, their dog bowls, their water, and their waste. So one of the biggest complaints that we hear, and probably some of you have heard, is dog bag, like the doggy bags left alongside the trail. I have firsthand observed many, many times that people just forget to pick those back up. They're an eyesore and they smell. So these are just simple ways that, we can do our part to make sure that not only everybody's having a good experience out there, but we're not introducing things into the alpine environment that shouldn't be there. And then the third point I want to make is kind of about dogs and wildlife, us and wildlife. We're all visitors to these environments. Certainly dogs are visitors to these environments too. Alpine animals are not familiar with dogs. They don't have defenses against dogs because they don't know dogs. In a lot of areas, dogs are like leashes are required. In some areas, they're not required, but it is a best practice to keep your dog on a leash so that they're not chasing after wildlife or disturbing wildlife. But I would also implore you to do it for the safety of your own dog, because there have been unfortunate incidents of dogs having encounters with wildlife or running off after wildlife, and either being hurt or killed. So even for the safety of your own best friend, keep your dog on a leash. I had to rescue somebody's off-leash dog from a boulder field on a peak once because it ran after an animal and voice recall wouldn't work. So those types of things can happen. So just be mindful of that. And lastly, so those are some of the major issues that we're seeing out there and things that we can all be helping with. And I could talk forever about those, but I won't. On the screen, you see that all 7 Leave No Trace principles are mentioned. If you have any questions about these topics or Leave No Trace in general, just feel free to pop those into the chat. And I can get those answered, or feel free to message me directly. CFI also has some great short informative videos that I'll post to the event after it's over. And I really just want to invite you all to enjoy the environment that you're going to be entering into or continue entering into, because it is extraordinary if you take the time to really learn about it and appreciate it. So it is, again, a community effort to keep these places beautiful. And so I encourage you to take some time to get to know it better and to get to know what you can do to help keep it protected and wild. And back to you, Nick.
Okay, thank you, Mary, for taking a moment to talk dirty to us. For everybody out there, we have a poll going asking where you're joining us from and how many peaks have you done. So if you haven't done that yet, click on the polls and
Should be up now for you, Nick. So
okay, cool. Cruising. All right, let's talk about how your body reacts to elevation. All right, so here we are at Denver, or that's where I'm at, the Mile High City, and Mount Elbert, the highest peak in Colorado, is 14,433 feet. And so on the right here is a kind of an estimate of what oxygen level is like. So at sea level, it's about 100%. And, we've all had a friend come visit us in Colorado, and the first thing they say when they get off the plane is, I feel kind of winded. And what they're noticing is, that reduction in oxygen. They're getting about 15% less than they were back at sea level. And so when we go hiking up to the top of a 14er, that number goes down a lot more. We lose about 20% more oxygen. And if you're coming from sea level, that's about 40% less. So that's significant. You're definitely going to feel that. If you ever decide to go climb Mount Everest, Everest Base Camp is somewhere around 17,000 feet. And then the top of Everest is about 30,000 feet, and right above 25,000 feet, if you've ever read John Krakauer's Into Thin Air, he talks about being in the death zone where the oxygen is so thin that your body is unable to heal itself. So 14ers are, for perspective, we're a lot lower than climbing 8,000 meter peaks, but it does have an effect on your body, especially when you're taking that, we'll say 20% drop in oxygen. So what kind of effect does that have? Well, what you'll kind of notice is things kind of slow down a little bit. You might feel more tired. It's pretty common to get maybe a mild headache or feel a little bit lightheaded. You may not want to eat a whole lot. Your stomach might feel a little tight. That's pretty normal. I usually get kind of a very mild headache sometimes. Your brain, you tend to think a little bit slower, and you might move a little bit slower than you would at lower elevation. And these are all effects of altitude sickness or the effects of elevation. And the important thing to remember is that if you keep going higher, they're going to get a little bit worse. And if you go lower, they'll tend to get better. So you kind of want to plan out or just kind of monitor your body and how you're feeling throughout the day. If you're 500 feet below the summit and you got a mild headache, yeah, it's okay. It's probably okay to keep going. But if you're, 20 minutes from the car and you're already really not feeling good and you got a headache and you're starting to have these symptoms, it's probably a good idea to turn around. If you're ever hiking with somebody and they start like vomiting or they become very disoriented, that's someone who's having pretty severe effects, and you need to head down with them. And you never want to send somebody who's having those conditions, send them down by themselves. You want to make sure that you get them back to the car and get them down to a lower elevation. And lastly, I'll mention, if you do struggle with elevation sickness, there are some medications. Diamox is one of them. I have not personally needed these, but I know people who have, and they can make a difference. And the way your body reacts, it can change throughout your life. I've known people who didn't have any problems when they were younger, and then they got older and it became more of an issue. And I know people that used to struggle with it and it just kind of went away after a while. So, every day is different and unique. And so just be aware of these things as you're hiking up the mountain. So we'll talk really quickly about search and rescue and what to do if things don't go well or you find yourself in trouble or somebody else. So here is just a bunch of headlines I took from one summer. Things like rise in 14er deaths reflects rise in climbers' fearless behavior. Black Hawk used to rescue 2 people stuck on a 14er overnight. And so as we get into the summer, if you pay attention to the headlines, you'll start to see these types of stories everywhere. People get rescued all the time. They're usually not fatal, but unfortunately every year we have, I'd say on average, between 6 and 12 deaths in the mountains on 14ers. And when you compare it to, the hundreds of thousands of people who hike every year, it's as a percentage pretty small, but there are risks and there are dangers. And this really hit close to home for me about a decade ago when one of my friends and climbing partners, Rob Jansen, got caught in a rock fall between Snowmass Mountain and Hagerman Peak and did not survive. And so, up until that point, we had a great group of friends and we were going out and we were climbing every weekend. And I just want to say, like, when something like this happens, it really has a huge impact on your life and your group of friends, and the thing that that you live for and brought you a lot of joy all of a sudden becomes a deep source of hurt and loss. So just be careful and think about those things when you're pushing the limits a little bit. All right, so what are the things that can get you into trouble? So we'll look at the next 4 months here over the summer from June to September. So for probably about the next month, we'll have some snow in the mountains. This has been about an average snow year for the Front Range and Saguache Range. And there's been a lot of snow out in the San Juans. And so, you will encounter snow probably for about the next month. And then getting into July and August, that snow will be melted. We're also getting into monsoon season when we start getting regular thunderstorms that usually happen in the afternoon. And we'll talk about that a little more. And then when you have thunderstorms, lightning becomes a big risk. So anytime you're above tree line, you get caught in a lightning storm, it can be really bad. And then wherever you are, there's always a risk of, taking a fall, getting caught in rock fall or a rock slide, or getting off route. And those hazards are always there regardless of the year. And then kind of when we get into the end of August, early September, usually we're past monsoon season. There's kind of a nice little window there to do some longer climbs, but you still have to watch the weather because you can get kind of an early snowstorm and the weather can turn cold. So let's talk about a couple of these. So on the left is the current, I downloaded this today. It's the Colorado snow water equivalent. So it's the amount of snow in the mountains. And this is for the entire state. And basically we are on the black line here. The green line is an average year. The red line is like the lowest on record. The blue line is like the highest on record. And so, as I mentioned a second ago, the San Juans have a ton of snow. So across the state, that puts us a little bit above average. But this kind of gives us an indication of where we might be during a normal year. And then this photo in the top right here, this is on Mount Princeton in the middle of June. And what happens is most of the route is snow-free, but we have these snowfields that you have to walk across. And in the morning, the snow will be frozen usually and be pretty solid. And then as it warms up during the day, it'll get really soft. And so I like to recommend that people bring microspikes when there's these kind of conditions. You can just throw on your microspikes and walk across the snow and it's less of a problem. And as we looked at that conditions report, they were talking about snowshoes are still needed, but usually when snowshoes aren't needed anymore, microspikes are helpful. And then I'm going to say by probably about the time July rolls around, microspikes won't be needed in most places, maybe still in the San Juans, but the rest of the peaks should be pretty clear of snow. So let's talk a little bit about weather. Weather is one of the biggest things that affects your climbing on 14ers. And Bill links on 14ers.com and on the app. Every peak has a weather forecast specifically for that area. So the map on the right here shows where this peak is. And then this looks like it's for Mount Evans. I think it was Bierstadt actually. The other thing you want to look at is what is the elevation of the forecast. So the elevation here is projected at 13,000 feet in this forecast. Sometimes it'll be as low as 11,000 feet. So kind of take that into consideration. The higher you go, the lower the temps are going to be. And then, this will, NOAA gives the forecast about a week out. And so it's hard to know exactly what the weather is going to be like too far in advance. A week ahead kind of gives you a little bit of an indication, but it's really not until like 2 to 3 days before your hike that, the technology really starts to zoom in and you kind of know what kind of weather you're looking at. And so this is your weekly forecast, kind of showing what's happening. And then if you click on the hourly forecast, you get a graph like this. And so this is the hourly forecast looking at the next 48 hours, or a 48-hour period from a couple years ago on Mount Bierstadt. And so up at the top here in the red, we can see our temperatures rising up during the day, dipping at night. We have a pretty steady wind, about 10 miles an hour or less. That's really nice. There will be some cloud cover ramping up. And then the green and the red, the green is rain and the red is thunder, which also includes lightning. And basically what we're looking at here is slight chance, chance, likely. And so what we want to hike is we really want to target, this early morning here. And so we have 2 days here, and we're looking at kind of that morning window. And so what we can see is on the first day, we should have clear skies till about 10 a.m. and then chances of rain are going to start going up, and we could actually have a thunderstorm that early. Where on the second day, the chance of rain starts at noon. So you can see that on the second day, we have a better weather window. So let's say we're going to get out, we're going to hike Bierstadt. We were going to start at 6 a.m. on this second day. Let's say it takes us 4 hours to get to the summit. We're up there at 10 and we start heading down, and we're back to the car by noon, when there's a chance of rain. If we were to hike on this first day, I would suggest starting just a little bit earlier to give yourself, more of an early morning window so that you have plenty of time to get off the summit by the time these storms roll in. And what to look for in the sky. A lot of times when people get caught in a lightning storm, they say things like it just came out of nowhere and we got caught off guard. And a lot of times, like, if you're not really paying attention and not really looking, you might not notice the signs of a storm forming. So this is a bluebird day. I wish, every day I went hiking looked like this. What usually happens is the morning will start off like this. And then as the day progresses, the next phase will be, you'll get these kind of white cotton ball, kind of puffy clouds. And, these don't pose a threat immediately, but they are cloud activity starting to build. And some days it'll just stay like this all day. But what you want to watch for is when the clouds start to consolidate and you start to see a couple of things here. So this is obviously a big storm cloud. The clouds are getting higher, and also they get dark underneath. And so by the time the clouds are looking like this, you want to be already heading down and hopefully getting off the mountain. So just kind of keep an eye on the sky. Look up every once in a while and just see what's happening. Also be aware most of our storms tend to come in from the west. And so if you're hiking an east face going up a mountain, you might not be able to see what's on the other side. So sometimes it's helpful to ask people coming down, what the weather looks like on the other side of the peak that you can't see. So keep an eye on these. Hopefully your day will stay here and here. And if it does progress to here, hopefully you're already on your way down. All right, let's talk about lightning real quick. So this is a graph put together by Chris Tomer, and it is lightning strikes, or the number of lightning flashes per day in the state of Colorado based on the date. And so we can see that, storms start ramping up in May, and then June and July are kind of our highest. And this is for the entire state. So in the mountains, I would expect more lightning strikes a little bit earlier, probably June and July is going to be the highest. But you can see when lightning's a problem, and that's in the summer. And then this is a graph showing the time of day that somebody was struck by lightning and died. And so if we look at from noon to 5 p.m., that's over 200 people have died. And then if we look at, early morning to 11 a.m., that's 20. So it kind of shows you when lightning strikes are happening. So the earlier you're out there, the better your chances are of having good weather and avoiding lightning strikes. I feel really bad for like these 3 people because they were out there early and they were the unlucky ones. But anyway, this is why we get up early. This is why we hike early, and this is why we get down early. Some additional sources on weather. Some people really like to geek out on weather forecasts and the science, and that can be really helpful when you're up in the mountains. Mountain Forecast is another website that you can click on a 14er and it'll give you a forecast specifically for that 14er and some information. Also, local meteorologist Chris Tomer who's on Channel 2. He has a blog and a YouTube channel. And what Chris likes to do is he'll give kind of a weekend forecast for the mountains. He's a big 14er guy and climbs a lot. And so he'll talk about the different ranges and different areas and kind of give you some advice heading into a weekend on, where the weather is looking good and where it's not. So I recommend both these sites. And then, when I started giving this talk, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, smoke wasn't really even something that we considered. And sadly, now it's becoming a pretty regular part of the forecast. And, as we've seen, even though we've had a really wet spring here in Colorado, Canada's had terrible wildfires and a lot of their smoke is coming down. And so 2 of the websites that I like to use are airnow.gov. They have a mapping that's fire.airnow.gov, and so you can look at air quality. And the other one is Weather Underground. And so this is a photo from last year when there were some fires in New Mexico, and they will show where the active fires are, where the smoke is, and that can go into your planning. During 2020, which was just the year from hell, Colorado had its 3 largest fires in state history. And this is a picture on Capitol Peak of sunrise. And the smoke was just absolutely horrible. And it kind of felt like being in Lord of the Rings. It made for some cool pictures. But sometimes especially if we have local fires, things can get really smoky. And one thing you can do is if you're sensitive to the smoke, one thing that really helps are masks, like a KN95 or an N95 mask, the ones that you threw in your closet since COVID. It's a good idea to throw one of those in your backpack, because if you get caught in an area, I was out backpacking on the Colorado Trail, and there was a nearby wildfire and the smoke really ramped up, and I got caught out there for a couple hours before I could get out, and it really kind of affected my lungs and my sinuses for the next 6 weeks. And so I just carry a mask with me. So if you get caught in bad smoke, that's a good way to be able to breathe and get out of a situation.
I'd also add too that I thought that was kind of dumb until hiking Holy Cross 2 years ago during the smoke, and thought, oh, no big deal. I had a cough that lasted about 8 weeks and could not shake it, and it was because of the smoke. So it's good advice.
Yeah, it can be pretty nasty. So anyway, I'm going to start kind of wrapping some things up here, but I think, like, if you're new to 14ers and you're just starting out, a good place to start is the Class 1 and Class 2 peaks. You have about 30 peaks to choose from. And, while you're out doing this, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn how to, plan a trip. You're going to learn and watch and observe the weather. You're going to see how your body reacts to elevation. You're going to get an idea when you start getting tired, how much food and water you eat and drink. And then, kind of start moving on to some of the harder Class 2s and getting into Class 3s. And here, things like route finding becomes a little bit harder. You're going to get some experience in some loose scullies, some technical climbing. You might get into some longer days, and hopefully by this time you're starting to meet some people and make some good partners. And then by the time that you get to the really, really hard peaks, the Class 4 peaks, you're going to use all this knowledge that you've gained from doing these other peaks and putting it all together. And one of the ways that people really get themselves into trouble is, they just go straight for the hard peaks, and they haven't really learned about the weather. They haven't really learned about their body. They haven't learned about their partners. And then they put all those things together on a really difficult peak, and they get themselves into trouble. So if you kind of start with a progression like this, you don't have to climb all the easy peaks first, but kind of go back to that list of ranking them by difficulty and kind of work your way up. And by the time if you learn the skills here, you'll be ready to climb these peaks by the time you get here. So if you do get into trouble, there's a couple ways to call for help. You can always use your cell phone and call 911. Not all of the peaks have reception everywhere, but if you can get a signal, 911 is your best bet. If you want to get a tracker, I have a Garmin InReach Mini that I really like. It's kind of like it runs on a service plan, kind of like a cell phone. So you pay a couple $100 for the device, and then you pay, I think it's like, I pay like $8 a month for it. And this is also good if you have like a spouse or someone who cares about you, worries about you when you're gone. You can actually turn on a tracking feature and they can see where you're at in the mountains. Or if you need help, you got the emergency button. And also, if you're trying to meet up with people, maybe you're just going camping and you get out of cell range, you can text people at any time. Another thing is some of the new iPhones, I don't know if they're released yet, but they're going to start having satellite communication on the phones as well. So that's going to be another tool. Let's keep going here. Okay. And so when you do call search and rescue, the first thing you want to think about is it takes a lot longer than you want it to for help to get there, especially if you're in more remote places. Usually when people get hurt, it's not on a beautiful, sunny, clear day. Usually there's some weather, usually there's some technical terrain. And so search and rescue has to mobilize. They have to, get together, they have to come find you, and then they have to get you out of there. So you're going to be there for a while. And hopefully, a lot of times search and rescue will hike in, especially if it's really a non-life-threatening emergency, like maybe somebody broke an ankle or something like that. But there are two types of helicopters. We have Flight for Life, which can come in, and then also if you're fortunate, the Colorado National Guard will from time to time join in on search and rescue, and they might send in a Black Hawk helicopter to pick you up. And so Ryan actually got to ride in a Black Hawk helicopter when a member of his hiking group broke an ankle. And so we might talk about that a little bit. Well, Ryan, do you want to say, can you keep it to like a minute? You want to
Sure.
talk about your helicopter ride?
Yeah, unintended bucket list item. No, just to kind of tie in with what Nick's saying, one thing to be, definitely wary of is that, if you do get in a situation where you do need to call for rescue, especially on one of the devices he mentioned previously, whether it's a Spot or an InReach or whatever, do not expect that, you push the button and 5 minutes later, it's like an Uber, someone's there to pick you up. In our case, the accident happened is around 2:30 or 3 p.m. And we were fortunate that the military did decide to help out. And I think the Black Hawk came in to get us it was almost 9:30 p.m. So yeah, a little over 6 hours from the time that we signaled for help before anybody actually arrived. And they had also told us that if basically the military didn't respond and they couldn't fly the helicopter, our team would have been getting there hiking all the way up from the bottom. This was on Crestone Peak. They would have been getting there at 2 to 3 in the morning. So one of the takeaways from this is, make sure, going back to the 10 essential rescue systems that you have there, make sure you've got stuff that, hey, worst case, if you got to spend the night, might not be comfortable, but it's better than the alternative. So
cool. Thanks, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
And another really important thing to do is it's a lot easier to get rescued if people know where you are. And so especially, I'm looking at some of you younger people, college age guys who just, grab your car keys and head out for the weekend. It's really important to leave kind of a detailed description of where you're going to be. That can be an email or a text message, or you just want to have somebody who's kind of keeping an eye on when you're going to get back. And so for each hike I do or trip I do, I put together something like this: is I give a date. I say where I'm going. I'm going to go do, this was, I didn't update this for last year, but we'll pretend like that's this year. I'm going to go do Mount Bierstadt's West Slopes. I'm going to go with Mary and Ryan. And, we're going to start at 6 a.m. on Guanella Pass. And here's our plan. And then at the bottom here, I say, if you haven't heard from me by 7 p.m., call the Clear Creek County Sheriff, and here's this number. And so what'll happen then is if something happens, and I'm still out there after dark, the sheriff knows exactly where to go. And they're going to go to the trailhead. They're going to look for my car. They're going to go there here, and they're going to go right to me. If nobody knows where you're at and your roommate says, oh, he's been gone for 2 or 3 days, and I think he was going to go hike somewhere around Buena Vista where there's like 6 14ers, then they have to go look through all the trailheads to find a spot, and then they might not know what route you're on. And so, that can be the difference between a successful rescue and a fatality. So make sure somebody knows where you're at. Okay, so that's gonna kind of wrap it up. I wanted to mention a couple things. We used to have monthly happy hours, and then during the pandemic we stopped, and now they're starting to pick up again. But there's a Denver group, a Boulder group, which Ryan runs, and there's a Colorado Springs happy hour. Ryan, do you know when you're going to do another Boulder?
Yep.
Happy hour?
Usually when we are kind of more on our regular cadence, we always do the third Thursday of every month. So I'll be getting one set up and planned here for June. This month got a little away from me, but yeah, usually the third Thursday, and that offsets from the Denver one, which is usually the first Thursday. And then the Springs, I believe you guys, I think, do Wednesday. Mary, correct me if I'm wrong on that one. So, but yeah,
Yeah,
they're once a month, and we usually announce them about a week in advance, typically.
Yeah. And so this is a great place to meet hiking partners, to come talk to people who've hiked a lot. If you're new and you have questions, or you want to meet people who are interested, this is a fun way to come hang out. And those get announced usually on the Facebook page and also on the .com. We'll be doing a group, the 14ers.com has a group of people that joins the Colorado 14er Initiative to do trail work. This is going to be our 8th year, and we're going to be working on Mount Belford in late June. If that's something that interests you, feel free to send me a message. I can tell you how to get signed up. And then we have some gatherings where a group of people get together from the .com. We pick a spot, go camp, and then people hike and climb from there. And so the next one will be coming up it's the fall gathering outside of Lake City. That's hosted by Taylor, organizes that every year. And then usually at the end of October, right around Halloween, we do what's called the Winter Welcomer, even though it's still fall. Usually like 30 or 40 people will go hike Quandary in snowy conditions. That's why they call it the Winter Welcomer.
It's a good appetizer without throwing you into the deep end of winter climbing.
Yeah, and Ryan's organized that, and Britt's organizing that in the past couple of years. And then just last weekend, we brought up the spring gathering again after it had been dormant for a few years. And that was out near Twin Lakes. And we probably had 15, 20 people went out and camped, and a couple of people.
I think we had 20. It was a quieter year. Weather was not great, but we made the best of it.
Yeah, so there's plenty of ways to get plugged in, whether it's drinking beer or coming out and climbing and meeting people. I also want to say, we live in a world where you can buy things online very quickly, but I think it's important that we support our local outdoor stores. And a couple of my favorites are Neptune up in Boulder, Bank Gate here in Golden, and then Mountain Chalet. And next week, same time on Thursday, Mary and I are going to be at Mountain Chalet. I'm going to be giving this exact same talk. So if for some reason you want to hear it all again, or you want to come hang out, we're going to be at Mountain Chalet next week.
Yeah, meet us in person.
Yeah. That'd be fun. So anyway, that's the end of my talk. I'm Nick Januchis. Thanks for sticking around. Feel free to shoot me a friend invite on Facebook, or on Mongoose on 14ers.com, and there's my Instagram. And if you have questions or anything, feel free to hit me up. Or if you get out and if you hike your first peak in the next couple of weeks, send me a photo. There's always a couple people who attend this talk and then get out and hike. So that's a lot of fun. I do have a pretty busy schedule, so maybe I don't really need any invites to go do Bierstadt or anything, but you know, if you're having a barbecue or something, I don't know, hit me up. And I think with that, how are we doing on time? We took a lot of time. So I think now we're gonna go to our question and answer. We should look at the poll real quick. Did anybody?
We do have the poll up, Nick. So pretty good
Yeah.
actually with 96 people. Most folks were from Colorado. Not super surprising, but then kind of with a spackling of other states nearby and then kind of the general areas. But the most interesting, of course, was how many 14ers you climbed. Almost half was none. So hopefully this helps.
Wow, that's great.
And then coming up very close second was 41%. That was 1 to 10. So again, hopefully this kind of helped you get a little more comfortable with some of the next steps. And then after that, it's kind of a small grouping,
Good.
more advanced.
We hit our target audience. That's fantastic. So.
Well, and also too, if we got some time, Nick, I figured chat and kind of have some questions back and forth. I jotted down and made note of a couple of the good ones that we had already in the chat, and then I figured if not, we can open it up. We've also got so a couple other folks to kind of note on here for everybody. So obviously, we've already heard one of my fellow admins as well, Mary. We also have Andrew Tim, who's also one of the co-admins on the 14ers.com page. And then Taylor Holt. He's also a SAR member with Chaffee County North. So he can also tell you what not to do in the mountains. But yeah, first couple questions we wanted to throw out since they'd already been asked on the chat. One gentleman asked and said, hey, heard about a lot of people that want to stay dry at altitude. What do you recommend for people like myself that sweat a lot with just a light shell on?
Polyester / spandex base layer, something that's like moisture wicking. Yeah, I would go with that. Definitely not cotton. I don't know if that was mentioned in the gear section at all, but don't wear cotton. It doesn't dry well. That's pretty basic stuff. But yeah, any sort of base layer is going to be mostly like a polyester material that should be good at moisture wicking. So that's where you want to go, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah, and also I'd also add to that a little bit. I sweat a ton. I actually bring multiple different things of the same base layer. I prefer wool, and like synthetics are good too. But I literally will carry 2 or 3, and if one of them gets, basically just gets full of sweat, not to be too gross, change and keep going. It definitely makes a difference for me.
Yeah, same with socks too. Like, wool, Smart Wool, Darn Tough are great brands for socks. And if you anticipate like in spring where your feet might get wet, or you just have sweaty feet or you might have river crossings or something like that, it's never a bad idea to bring an extra pair of socks.
Yep. So this one, Taylor, might be
before we do another question real quick, I do want to jump in on the search and rescue side of things. So one thing that's pretty important, I don't think Nick mentioned it, is a Corsair card. If you're going to be in the backcountry, there's a little bit of confusion about what a Corsair card does. And you can get them at most gear stores, I think. If you Google online, there's a list of places that sell them. A Corsair card is not rescue insurance. It is basically, it reimburses the search and rescue organizations for any equipment that they use to rescue you. And obviously that benefits us, so we'd appreciate it if everybody gets a Corsair card. Oh, there you go.
I didn't talk about it though. This was in the extra slide, so go ahead.
Sure. Getting rescued on the mountain is free. So it's mostly free, and there's a caveat to that, but like, you don't have to pay for us to come get you. And if you need help, please call. The only expense that you have to pay is if we need to come get you with a medical helicopter. And that's basically a medical helicopter is a flying ambulance. So it's the same as if you need to pay for an ambulance, in the city. That would be an expense that would be out of pocket for you. But if you need a medical helicopter, you should probably take it because your life is probably in danger. So other than that, search and rescue is free. And so if you need help, call. and we'll come get you. So one other thing on search and rescue is with more people getting out in the mountains, each year we're having more and more calls. I think last year, Chaffee County, it was either their most or second most calls they've ever gotten. And first of all, thanks to everyone for coming to this presentation, because there's two types of calls that we get. There's the ones that are unpreventable, and there's the ones that are preventable. You know, sometimes accidents happen, people fall, they break a leg, they get hit with rockfall. It's kind of unavoidable at times. But then there's the ones that we get called where the people were just unprepared. They didn't do their research on the route, they didn't have the right equipment. And so it's okay to be part of the first group. And if you need help, if you're in part of the second group, please call, but do everything you can to just study the route descriptions, bring the right gear, find the right people to go with. And it's also a lot easier to find you if it's a known location and a known injury. So that's where those satellite communication devices are key. If we don't know where you are and we don't know what's wrong with you, it can take a really long time, like Nick said. But if we know where you are and we know what's wrong with you, that really cuts down on the time that it takes to get to you. So that's all I want to say on SAR. But yeah, go get a Core SAR card if you don't have it. And if you get a fishing license or a hunting license, that Core SAR card is basically included in that.
Yeah. Hey, Taylor, there was a follow-up question. What about people who are from out of state and require rescue? Nothing changes, right?
No. We even rescue Texans and Californians.
All 50 states accepted. Actually did have one other one, and Taylor, you might have more info me on this. Someone asked about the statistics and the number of SAR issues or SAR missions up on the 14ers. I know last year, I think overall there was 3,600 in Colorado, but I'm not sure how many were on the 14ers. I'd guess the majority, but there's also a lot of hunting and rafting calls as well.
I don't know the exact stats, but for Chaffee County, it's the majority because we have so many 14ers in the county. And winter, at least in our county, winter and spring is pretty mild in terms of number of calls we get, but it's not uncommon in the summer to have multiple calls on the same day. I know that's happened in the past where we had 3 missions going on the same day. So yeah, and that's, you know, summer 14er, casual 14er crowd getting in trouble, and pretty common. I would say if I had to guess, it's definitely more than half. Probably upwards of 3/4 of the missions are 14er hikers in the summer. So
Yeah,
One
good
thing to
number.
add, Taylor.
Go ahead.
You know, because you had mentioned that the one cost is search and rescue is a potential need for like Flight for Life or something like that. With your InReach subscription, they do give an option for a search and rescue insurance. I think it's like $30 a year. That given the cost of Flight for Life, I would say it's highly advisable you get that.
yeah, Flight for Life can be tens of thousands of dollars. I think it's up like maybe even upwards of like 40 or 50,000. So it's not cheap. So yeah, anything you can do to mitigate that cost is not a bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. Third question we had out of the first 4. We actually had somebody mentioning, do you suggest hyperbaric treatments coming from sea level? Nick, what are your thoughts on doing the hyperbaric option if you're coming from sea level? You were a flatlander at one point, and you graduated.
Yeah, I've never. Everything I've read, that sounds awesome. I've never talked to anybody who's done that, but I know people do train for 8,000 meter peaks with hyperbaric. So like I said, I don't have any experience, but everything I've read is that they can definitely help with elevation. So yeah, if you have a hyperbaric chamber and if anybody in the chat's ever used one, let us know. They're not cheap. They tend to run, I think they start around $10,000. So yeah, I think that would help, but I can't say personally.
Yeah, I was actually the person that submitted that. So I'm going
Oh.
to try it out this summer. So I grew up in Colorado, but as I go back now and I hike and hunt at like 11,000, 12,000 feet, I've noticed for me, it's very hard. And so thinking about a 14er, it's just something I'm considering. So I'm going to try it this summer and hike my first 14er.
That's awesome.
How it goes.
Yeah.
Number 4 we had, and then last one before we can just kind of open it up to the general group here. But actually, a really good one is it best practice to be back below tree line by noon or off the summit by noon? And Nick,
I'm gonna say it's variable. I think if you're gonna just make a blanket statement, the sooner the better. Like get down below tree line before noon. There are days where you look at the forecast and it's like 0 to 10% chance. And, you know, I hate giving this advice because I don't want it to be misinterpreted, but you can be a little bit more lenient as long as you get that experience of like learning how to read the clouds. You know, summiting at noon on a day like that is probably fine. But you always have to be watching, like regardless of the forecast, be looking to the west. Be aware of what's going on. If you see big dark clouds with heavy bottoms to them, then, you know, it's probably time to start turning around if you're above tree line. And that can happen at 9 a.m. on some days, and it can happen at 2 p.m. on some days. So if you're looking for a blanket statement, I'd say it's a good idea to be off the summit by like 9, 10 and below tree line by noon. Yeah. I've
And
seen
I'd
a lot
even
of times where like people think the summit by noon thing is fine, and they're going up at 11 o'clock and there's storm clouds coming right at them. So it
Well, I'd
really varies. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd even add one of the worst lightning accidents on the 14ers was on Mount Bierstadt several years back, and I think it was 15 people got hit. As I recall, I think it was around 11:15 when that strike happened. I mean, it was not even noon.
Right.
You know, one thing I personally like to tell people is, hey, there's no penalty for getting up and down early, but there is if you're late. So you know, those that know me, I am not a morning person at all. I hate the 4 a.m. starts or earlier. I'll be pretty curmudgeonly. But you know, like I said, it's one of those things. If you get up, get down, and you're back to your car by 11, hey, great. Have lunch and you're good and got the rest of the day to do something. So, you know.
I'd also factor in the difficulty of which 14er you're on and how quickly you can descend. Because, you know, Bierstadt, you could potentially descend a lot faster than say like a pyramid or something.
Yep.
So,
yeah, there's
Longs especially. If you're on the backside of Longs, it's hours before you get back to tree line. So I mean, yeah, Bierstadt, you can get down probably if you're really fast in 30, 45 minutes. Bierstadt or Longs is much different. So that's a great point. Capital, same thing. Nobody should be on Capital that's listening to this talk though. So
yeah, I agree with all that. And the one thing I've noticed is the more experienced people get, they tend to go earlier and earlier and earlier, where you think it would be the other way around. But I think, you know, if you're doing a peak, you've got some time invested. You've driven halfway across the state, you've woken up early, and you don't want to get caught like, you know, an hour short and have to turn around. So it's just always a good idea to start early just to give yourself more flux if the weather's bad or if you're take longer than usual.
With that, we want to open it up just to general questions. If you know, anybody else has any questions for Nick, or also any of the other four of us have.
Yeah, that's for everybody. We'll answer as a panel.
Hello, I have a question about what you guys suggest eating the night before a hike, and what kind of snacks do you take while you're on the hike?
Yeah, good question. I think it's gonna vary from person to person. I try to avoid anything that might, you know, contribute GI issues or something like that. I tend to eat pretty bland food going up the mountain. I don't think you want to go try out a new spicy restaurant the night before. But what do you guys? I usually bring pretty basic snacks, usually protein and a little bit of sugar snacks, like type stuff. But Taylor, Ryan, what do you? Mary is very particular about her snacks.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I also agree with Nick. Yeah, I definitely don't. I've made that mistake once or twice, and that was a really poor choice. definitely, yeah, don't try anything that you're not familiar with how your body handles it. I personally carb load like crazy the night before. That for me is a big thing. I'm also one of those weird people that I cannot eat much during the day, and so that's kind of one of my ways of trying to mitigate that. So for snacks, it's very rare for me to actually have much. Same thing in winter. But one thing I will say is bring something that you'll also, as far as snacks, bring something that you'll actually eat. There's
Yeah.
some things that get pretty, you just don't even want to, at altitude. And so anything that'll help get you some calories is always a good thing.
The number of Clif Bars that I've taken on hikes that end up back in my car unopened is uncountable. So I agree with that. Bring something that you're going to eat. It's a good idea to bring something, at least one snack that has some sodium in it, because you'll deplenish your sodium really quickly doing this. I'm really not the person to ask. I bring junk food. I survive on gummy worms and Reese's peanut butter cups during hikes. So
Yeah.
don't overthink it too much. Honestly, just make sure you have a good dinner the night before and bring, I probably bring 4 or 5 different snacks, whether it's trail mix or a bar or a candy bar or something on a hike, but don't overthink it too much.
Okay.
Yeah. The best tip I ever got what to take on a hike is if it's something you would normally eat at home, then it's something you're more likely to want to eat when you're hiking. And that's true of me. So as soon as I started doing that, I was eating more as I was hiking. So it's all salami and cheese and grapes and
I pretty much operate off of Chex Mix, Welch's gummies, and almonds. And the Chex Mix kind of came randomly. That was some lady gave it to me when I was struggling on Holy Cross. And once I ate some, it's like a Popeye and a can of spinach, and I just had energy for the rest of the hike. I've taken it every hike since.
Great. Thank you, guys.
The one thing I'm always envious of, I keep saying I'm going to bring on a hike, is when Nick hikes with me, he always has a Ziploc bag of sushi rice or like sticky rice and just takes bites out of it. It looks really good. So I'm going to do that someday.
there were a couple of questions in the chat about people's knees and how to have more support. Hiking poles are great for downhill, certainly for uphill, but you'd be amazed how much stress they take off of your knees on the downhill. So if you're not using hiking poles and you have knee problems, or if you're not using hiking poles and you want to prevent knee problems, they really, really help on descents.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that. I think hiking poles is probably the best thing. And then going for like a class 1 trail is probably going to be a lot easier than not being on loose rocks. But probably be the two things. And then try to get a shorter day too, I guess. Those things. But yeah, good question.
Another question that came in was from Anne about whether or not class 1 14ers have shuttle or ride share systems to the trailhead. I think Quandary is the only one that has shuttling from a nearby town, from Breck. I think that's the only one, right?
Yep. Although Idaho Springs would probably be wise to, or not Idaho Springs, Georgetown would probably be wise to
Georgetown,
do that
yeah.
for Bierstadt, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess technically you could do a ride share to, like, if you're going to do Pikes Peak via Bar Trail, you could do that.
Yeah, and I mentioned responded there on the chat. I mean, it's a good way to be responsible, but yeah, the downside is a lot of the trailheads, even the class 1 peaks are still actually a ways away. I mean, like Handy's has a class 1 route, but I mean, to get there is a 5-hour drive, and then it's a lot of dirt road to get there. Same with San Luis, and then again you got some of the other peaks. So I guess I would say that it seems like the spirit of this question is, how to, take and, do a ride share of some sort. I would probably just say try to, find some partners or folks that you're going to the same peak and join up with them. It's always a great way to be, kind of responsible, I guess, with carbon footprint, so to speak.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I forgot to mention in the talk is also on 14ers.com, each route you can look at the trailhead description, and there's a lot of routes or a lot of peaks that you can just drive on a paved road to the trailhead, and there's other peaks that have off-road and might need four-wheel drive. So that's something else that you want to look into as well. And I should have mentioned that, but that's all available on the website. So,
Well,
Andy, do you have a question?
Let me just real quick on that. Like the website has so many resources. It really, Nick mentioned this in his talk. It really is the only resource that you need for climbing 14ers. I would recommend spending, if you're new to it, spend an hour or two just browsing the website and getting familiar with it. One thing that maybe you want to not mention it in your talk, Nick, but I'll say it now, is we don't typically recommend using AllTrails for 14ers. And that's something like a lot of people new to 14ers think like, oh, I'll use AllTrails as a resource. I use AllTrails all the time. It's a great resource for backpacking trips in Utah, day hikes in the foothills, whatnot. But for 14ers, use 14ers.com. There are a number of documented instances where people have gotten lost on 14ers because they were only using AllTrails. So use the website, get familiar with the website, use it to check forecasts, use it to look at route descriptions. It really is the only resource that you need. And if you have any other questions, you can ask on the Facebook page or on the forum on the website, but don't overthink it. Spend some time on the website and just familiarize yourselves with it because it's great. Okay, sorry, there was another question.
That's all good. All right. Anybody else have any other questions that you've been curious to ask us? And then can be in just like I said, 14ers or hiking Colorado in general too. We've also, all of us have done a lot too. So happy to be helpful however we can.
I had a question about backpacking. So how do you find like the right spots to backpack and camp while also respecting the leave no trace principles? And are there 14ers that don't allow it? How do you find out which ones don't?
Couple good questions. I can probably chime in a little bit, and then also has Mary written all over it too, being it's a kind of a CFI core thing. I'll jump on the 14ers that have the backpacking. So several of the peaks you pretty much do have to backpack to do. Capitol, Snowmass, the Chicago Basin Group. Those are usually the big ones. So Capitol and Snowmass this year, you do have to have an overnight permit if you're going up and backpacking there. So that's kind of part one. There are a lot of, well, Capitol specifically has designated spots that I think Capitol's got 8, I think, around Capitol Lake. And then Snowmass, I think, also has a handful around there. Best practice, in terms of if you're not staying there, is always try to, go in a place that's been stayed in before. That's what's kind of hard a little bit there, is that's kind of a gray area where it is becoming a bigger problem. The last time I was at Snowmass, I mean, it's gotten pretty, it's getting more and more popular. And so, yeah, kind of destruction of the environment around the area has gotten to be a little bit bigger. I don't know, Mary, if you have any other thoughts to add on to that, or Taylor or Nick, who also do quite a bit.
Yeah, I would say most of the peaks, or the majority of the peaks, have dispersed camping around the trailhead. A lot of people sleep in their cars at the trailhead. Another thing you can do is to, I don't know if people do this as much anymore, but is to just kind of backpack in maybe a mile or two along the route below tree line, maybe near water, and actually just kind of do like a backpack, maybe a mile from the car. And then the next morning you're already a mile closer. You do your hike and you come out. If you really want kind of a backpacking experience on the peak away from people. Trailhead camping is fine. That's probably what I've done the majority of the time, but you never know who's going to come cruising in at what hour of the night. And the other thing is, not everybody at these trailheads is there to do a 14er. So some people just go to parties, some people just go to camp. So sometimes you got to take that into consideration if you're trying to get a good night's sleep.
Oh, and then some of them also it's not allowed to, like the Maroon Bells parking lot. They'll wake you up and tell you to leave. Same with the Longs Peak one. Sometimes you can get away with it, but generally, so.
As far as like 14ers that require backpacking, there's probably less than 10. Like Ryan said, Snowmass Capital, Chicago Basin, the Blanca group from like Como areas, probably backpack that. But if you just want to, if you want to do it because backpacking's awesome, which it is, Gaia has some the mapping software. You can put the Trails Illustrated layer on, and a lot of times they'll tell you, they'll have like campsites identified on that particular map, and it'll tell you like no camping within 100 feet of such and such lake. So it's not foolproof in terms of that, but it's a good resource that gives you an idea of where you can and can't camp. Just using some of those mapping softwares. So like the Trails Illustrated hard copy maps are pretty good for that. 14ers.com too, same thing. You can look at trip reports and figure out like where people have camped in the past. So
Yeah, and I guess I'd tie up the leave no trace thing of just, trying to be careful in terms of, don't go pick the most pristine green spot with all the flowers, pick something where that's very clearly been used if possible, just to avoid, making more damage. And there's, the 14ers again are popular enough. There's usually, you'll see some places that are very clearly identified. It's kind of a different game if you're doing like 13ers, that kind of stuff. So I would just say, yeah, look for what's been used before, and that way you minimize your impact. Hopefully that helps, Christy.
Yeah, thank you.
Terry asked if 14ers.com takes support donations. Yes. Bill does foot the bill. Well, Bill foots the bill for all of the server support, server space, all of that. So he does, there is a page on the .com where he does accept donations. He doesn't expect them, but he certainly appreciates them when they happen.
And I just tossed it in the chat too. It's kind of one of those things. It's most years, and Bill also has some links to affiliates. So like if you buy some stuff from REI, go to the 14ers.com page, and then there's a little link you can click, and it takes you there, and then he gets a little commission because he referred you, basically. So that's a free way to do support. Hey, if you really like it and feel inclined, kind of as I put there in the link, yeah, he totally does accept donations and always has a breakout literally by the day of like how much it costs and what how the site is running. And yeah, it's been a couple years, it's been a little lean, and it's definitely one of those things like I've used this site for 12, 13 years at least. So for me, it's one of those things. If I always kind of check toward the end of the year, and if it looks like it's a little scrappy, it's like, hey, cool, hey, thanks, Bill, throw some money. So
I'll also add that those events that Nick talked about, the gatherings, the happy hours, all that's free. So like there's just want to make sure that everyone knows that. Encourage anybody to come out. It's open to everybody. So totally free to come.
Yep.
And usually the invitations are on the or the 14ers.com forum for the gatherings, especially. The happy hours usually get posted to the Facebook page and the forum. So. Yep.
One clarification about the Quandary system. So this year, the parking reservations begin on June 1st. The shuttle system does not start until June 15th. So just be aware the first couple weeks of June is parking reservations only.
And how late does that go? When do reservations end?
3. Oh, you mean like what time of year?
Yeah, October.
August, September.
It's through September 30th this year. Yeah, and the shuttle ends a little early as well. So the shuttle is kind of a sandwich in between for some reason.
And just to clarify, Quandary is a great first 14er or kind of easier 14er. And so you can get a parking reservation, you can take the shuttle, or you can have someone drop you off there. Is that correct? Okay.
Yep, that's correct.
All right, anyone else got any other questions? Again, we've got a little while here. We can happily answer some questions if you got them. Going once.
Wonder if our East Coasters are still with us. They're up late. It's
That's
nice
true.
to- And somebody from Toronto. It's great to have you all with us.
Our international presence, that's good.
Yeah.
Going twice. If anybody has any other questions?
I
We're
guess-
good.
Okay, we'll call it a wrap.
We'll go ahead and wrap it up. I want to say thanks. Thanks to everybody for attending. This was a lot of fun. I want to say thanks to Ryan and Mary for helping set this up and promoting it. And thanks for Taylor and Andrew for joining us in the discussion. And if you think of additional questions, we will make this video available probably in a week on YouTube. And I'll put it up on my YouTube page, and then we can link to it. And then if you have any other questions, feel free to email. I think everybody but me is a Facebook moderator admin here, so you can ask questions on the Facebook page as well.
And if not, we know Nick. We can hunt him down and get your question to him.
Awesome. Thank you again. It was amazing. Appreciate it.
Hey, you're welcome.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care, guys.